just going further. I'll give you an example of a church. Large church I used to preach for in California. And beautiful, big, beautiful building, and we were there, I don't know, had about 500 members, I guess. And when we first went there, my wife was very sensitive to light and dark and all that kind of business. And so we're going through the hallways. We had a big auditorium inside, and on the hallways would have classes on the outside, kind of like this. It's a lot bigger than this one, but you had hallways, you see. So the inside was kind of encased as an auditorium, and now you have hallways. And so we were walking down the hallways, and my wife says, it's awfully dark in here. It's like a mausoleum. And I said, it is dark down those hallways. And she said, what do you think a visitor would think going down those hallways? And the nursery's all the way in the back, see? And they're wondering, what's going to jump out and grab me and going down the way of that hall, because it's so dark you couldn't see, what gremlins might be there to get you, on the way down. So one day I asked the guy that did the janitor's work, and he'd been there forever, been there when they built the church, the building. And I said, how come it's so dark in these hallways? He said, I don't know, it's always been that way. Now, I could have said that's enough for me, that it's always been that way, it's got to be some kind of law. It's always been that way law, somewhere it's there, And so, but I said, well, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. You got lights fixtures there. So I said, why don't you check the light fixture? So he went and got a ladder, got up the light fixture, and he saw 2 sockets in the light fixture. You know where I'm going, don't you? But only one bulb. He thought about that for a moment, and being the wise man that he was, he decided to look at the other ones. There's a ton of them. He went all the way around this big building, in that hallway. He said, every one of them has 1 socket. I said, or 1 bulb. I said, how come these light fixtures, which are so important in these big hallways, that have 2 sockets, only have 1 bulb? He said, I don't know. We never thought about that. He said, he said, maybe it's because we only had enough bulbs for 1 socket. And once we put them in, it's all over with, see? Don't worry about it anymore. You know how church buildings, and I've been involved in church building and construction, you know how when you get to a certain point, and you're not quite finished, but there's a few little places that haven't been finished. He said, we'll get to them some other time, we're tired. They never get to it, don't they? You probably can find them in this church building somewhere. So I said, don't you think it's about time? This building's been existing for 20 years. Don't you think it's about time to put 2 light bulbs in those sockets? He says, I think you got a good idea. He was impressed with my wisdom. He's a good man. We joked about this a long time after. So he went around and put light bulbs in all of them, 2 of them in every fixture. Whoa, you could see. People coming in that Sunday thought they were in the wrong church building, And some of them commented, wow, what happened here? See, they got used to it. They got used to the dark and never questioned it. One better than that, at Lakeview, where I preached for 8 years, and we left, went to Spokane for a while, went down to California. And we built that big building there, and we had these dirt berms, that we put plants on and everything. Then we had a tile roof. But the problem was the kids would crawl up the dirt berms on the side walls and get up on the tile and break the tile. And so that was a problem. So finally the others decided, we got to do something. We can't have that going on. It's too expensive to replace those tile roof, And so they took the berms down. But behind the berms on the walls were these big dark places. They never painted it, put the berms up. Put the berms up there. So they're like little pyramids all around the building. These dark places. The building was kind of a pinkish, mauvish, or whatever. And they had these dark places. Well, I would come back from time to time and see that. I said, what happened? They said, we got together, made a final wise decision. We took the berms down. Oh, I said, that's probably a good idea. Save the roof. I said, why hasn't somebody painted it? Well, we don't know. We haven't gotten to that point. We kind of got used to the dark spots. It looked terrible. So finally they hired me back. They wish they had the world they hadn't hired me back the second time, but anyway, they did. And it didn't take me a couple of weeks before I talked to one of the deacons. I said, Deacon, he's a good guy. I said, what do you think about those spots on that building? He said, it looks terrible. He said, I wanted to paint it for a long time. I said, why didn't you? Well, I never got approval for it. I said, you're getting approval from me. Don't tell anybody. Go do it. I was living carelessly back in those days. But anyway, he went and did it. And the brethren thought, that's so fantastic. Is this the same building? But you see how it is, how we get used to things. We get used to things that aren't quite right. We get used to things that we know morally are just out of sync. We get used to things that really aren't pleasing God, but we allow them to be that way because it's always been that way. And after a while we're blind because we see the rubble and we get used to the rubble. We can't do that in our life. God doesn't expect us to be content with where we are. And God doesn't expect us to be content with rubble spiritually that's hurting us or maybe even destroying us. And leadership cannot be, because you see, positional leadership will say, well, hey, nobody's complaining about it, leave it that way. Until we get some critics complain about it, we won't paint those walls. Until we get somebody to complain about it, like some crazy preacher, we won't bother to put more light bulbs in the sockets, you see. You don't wait for that. You look, you see you have a need. And you see, that's what he's saying. He says, I see the need, let's get it done. Because if you don't meet the need and you let the walls that are half built somehow affect you and stop you, then there's a loss of strength in your movement. There's a loss of vision now, because you don't see the vision of the whole completed project. There's a loss of confidence and a loss of security. When that happens, you're losing your momentum. And you're losing the fulfillment of God's plan for you. So the real test then. Effective leaders have a plan of action to motivate people for righteousness. Effective leaders rise above their circumstances. Effective leaders like Nehemiah are people-oriented, not walls-oriented. That's what made him such a great leader. I don't know exactly what time we're supposed to break. I think I said somewhere it was about 11:15 or something. But you're not hungry yet, right? I think what I'm saying, and I say it kind of fast sometimes because I get excited about this subject, because I think it's so vitally important in our churches today. It's been interesting to me to see this kind of evolving since I've written that book. I didn't think much of the book. I mean, I thought it was a good book, but I didn't really think it would be one of my best sellers. And so I just kind of wrote it a few years ago and put it out there, and didn't really expect a whole lot from it. But it's been interesting to me because when I did a seminar at Sunset on this material several years ago, I had several elders come up to me and they're upset with me. They're angry with me. Yeah. I said, well, what's the matter? Well, you don't have respect for the authority of the eldership. Now, you see, if you're a positional thinker, that's the way you're going to respond to this material. But you don't have respect for the eldership and its authority. Because it's a hard thing to make that paradigm shift psychologically and spiritually from positional thinking to relational thinking. To realize that your authority can be exercised in a relative kind of way with the people that you know. And I'm going to close this with an example in John the 13th chapter. You're not too hungry yet, right? Everybody's falling asleep yet? Keep an eye on them, Micah. Don't fall asleep. Nail them. We're going to close with this one. John 13. I love this chapter. The disciples are eating that final meal with Jesus, the Last Supper. And it is the Last Supper. They don't quite figure out exactly how much of a Last Supper it's going to be with Jesus, but anyway, they're all around eating and everything. And all of a sudden they start fussing again. Remember Matthew 20? They're fussing about the fact of who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. Can we sit on your left and right hand? When you're on your throne as a king, we want to sit on the right hand, left hand of you and have the authority, share the authority with you and all that, have the power and all that business. That was going on in Matthew 20. Remember we started out with that? They're doing it again. The second time. And they're at the Lord's Supper. And Jesus is trying to say goodbye to them to some degree, you know, and so honoring the Lord's Supper and all that. And they're back there fussing like little kids, you know. I want to be the greatest. No, I want to be the greatest. Well, I should be the greatest because I'm closest to Jesus. And he loves me and you guys. I don't know if he loves you or not, but anyway, he loves me. And all this kind of stuff. And Jesus is probably thinking, you know, I've been preaching to them for a long time what servant leadership means. I've been preaching to them for a long time how they need to be slaves and servants. In my kingdom, you cannot, I won't say saved, but you can't be pleasing to God unless you're a servant in my kingdom. So he's been preaching to them all this time, they're not buying it. You ever had a few sermons that you preached that people weren't buying it? If you say no, you're lying to me right now. There's always going to be people that don't buy it, you know. And so he's finally saying, I'm fed up preaching to them. They don't seem to get the message, you know. So he takes this pitcher of water and pours it in the bowl, takes his towel and starts walking towards the disciples, getting on his knees to wash their feet. Wow. I mean,